morning, and we had a 6:30 p.m. meeting at night. So that was really nice for those that joined. This is, I think, going to be a similar conversation. I mean, we may get some different questions. Um, so we are here to talk about the potential implementation of the Princeton Plan. As many of you know, this has been a discussion in our district for quite some time. Ever since Indian Point announced their closure in January of 2017, we have been looking at ways that we can reduce expenses or increase revenue with the gap that Indian Point will create. Indian Point, as they shut down at the end of April, really in about 5 short weeks, with Indian Point's closure goes about 30% of our revenue. All right, Indian Point in their heyday, when they were at maximum capacity, paying their pilot at full tilt, it was around $25 million a year, or about 30% of our budget. So I don't need to explain to you folks what happens when a business or a school district or a family loses 30% of their revenue or income. What it means is we have to look really seriously at some of our expenses. In 2018, the board commissioned a study that was completed by an outside consulting firm that does this work for a living. The study basically yielded a number of opportunities for the district to reorganize students, elementary and middle school students. The reorganization recommendations are online. It's a cost analysis that was published and put online in November of 2019. And that analysis looked pretty specifically at our expenses, looked at our middle school and our 3 elementary schools. Literally, the consultants walked the schools, looked in every classroom, every instructional space. They reviewed bus routes. They really did a very thorough job to provide us with some options to potentially reduce costs. Those options ranged anywhere from closing elementary schools to moving 5th graders to the middle school. And the 2 options that the board wished to study a little more deeper is the Princeton Plan and status quo, basically keep doing what we're doing with 3 neighborhood elementary schools. The Princeton Plan is basically organizing students through their elementary career by grade level. So rather than going to school by your geography or by your address or zip code, all students starting in kindergarten are going to school K through 5 with their cohort, basically with their grade level cohort. So all the kindergartners in 1st grade are in school A, 2nd and 3rd grade in school B, 4th and 5th grade in school C, and they move together throughout that time, and then ultimately to the middle school for a similar experience. That plan, if we were to implement it, would reduce our expenses by roughly $2 million. $2 million in terms of taxes, because we've talked a lot about taxes over the last number of years, is basically a cost avoidance. All right? It's a cost avoidance of about 4.5%. What that means is that if we had 2 apples to apples budgets, all right, one budget that was the status quo, continued to offer 3 elementary schools by neighborhood, so on and so forth, versus the Princeton Plan, the tax avoidance would be about 4.5%, meaning we are not increasing taxes by an additional 4.5% in the Princeton Plan because we've reduced expenses by being much more lean and more efficient. How do you become lean and efficient in a school district? Well, you organize students by grade level. If you have more students in the same place at the same time that needs the same service, in this case, grade level instruction, you can do it with fewer people. We shared an analysis with the Board of Education and the community back in January that showed that if students move through their educational career K through 5, that the district could reduce staff and reduce expenses by about $2 million. That's what led us to this discussion. After the board narrowed down the focus to look at the Princeton Plan, and that decision was made back in January of 2020, about 14 months ago, we formed a stakeholder committee. We had PTA members, we had staff, we had community members and leaders, and they went through a problem-solving process or a strategic planning process, very similar, in fact, identical to the process the Board of Education has gone through each of the last number of years, called a SWOT analysis. It's basically a strategic approach of how to solve a problem. The problem we have is we're losing quite a bit of revenue through Indian Point. And one of the solutions is to potentially implement the Princeton Plan. So you go through a series of facilitated discussions, small groups, big groups, individual, and you complete an analysis where you weigh and rank and basically weight strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the proposal. So we had about 35 staff, parents, and community members go through that process. It started just before Thanksgiving, and the process wrapped up in mid-February. They provided a report and feedback to the board about what some of the strengths and weaknesses of the Princeton Plan would be, and some of the opportunities and threats that implementing the Princeton Plan could bring to our community. If it was really easy and if it was a no-brainer decision, we would have made it many, many moons ago, and we wouldn't be talking about this right now. But certainly, change is very difficult. This would be a significant change for students and for families. And the board wants to make sure that we do our due diligence by having conversations like this and providing opportunities for as much dialogue as possible, given the situation we're in a pandemic. So this is the second PTA meeting I think you folks have had in about 2 weeks. Actually, the third, because we had 2 of them on that Friday. We scheduled 6 community meetings, community-wide, with whomever would like to attend. And we scheduled a PTA meeting with the 2 other elementary schools, and the middle school and high school shared one last Tuesday. So tonight is really about providing an opportunity for you folks to ask some questions, to weigh in a little bit, let us know what you're thinking, what challenges you think the Princeton Plan poses, or why you believe it would be successful. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ruller, our Executive Director for Curriculum Instruction, just to give put a little more meat on the bone in terms of Princeton Plan or grade level banding.
Yikes. Okay, where to begin? I'm actually more eager to understand what the questions are, since we feel as though we've been talking about this for a little bit, and I'd like to give the BV community a chance to pick our brains a little bit. For those of you who were not on the bigger committee, you know, we would likely be looking at K1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you've heard me talk probably ad nauseum, you've certainly heard about some of the potential that could come our way if we were able to go in this direction, perhaps not immediately in year 1, but certainly over time, looking at the opportunity of bringing pre-K on board, looking at science being taught as a special, looking at down the road the potential of bringing foreign language acquisition to elementary. There are many, many things that can be looked at more efficiently when you're housed that way. Instead of replicating something 3 times over, you're putting it in the building where the grade levels who are pertinent to that particular instruction reside. So I actually was a classroom teacher in a neighboring district when they went Princeton Plan from neighborhood schools. It was a tremendously beneficial experience. And in terms of curriculum and instruction, it really is the dream team, if you will. I think we heard that from the communities we met with, Somers, Ossining, and Tarrytown. But I don't know if, like I said, I'd like to stop talking and let you ask some questions, and then perhaps we can answer.
All right, thanks, Margaret. What I'll do is I'll start with what people have emailed me or called about already. And then again, if you want to put things in the chat throughout, we'll be sure to get to all of them. The first one is just a logistics question that people came up. When will the Board of Ed make their decision? And when will the community know what the outcome is?
The board has a rolling deadline, but certainly one by mid-April. The reason the decision needs to be made by mid-April is we need to tell the community and you folks what is in or what is not in the budget, specifically what a potential tax increase would be. So by mid-April, decision would be made. And I think there really are a number of questions. One is, does the Princeton Plan have merit? If the Princeton Plan, if we believe the Princeton Plan has merit, the next conversation is when would we implement it? Would we implement it for this September of 21? Would we implement it for September 22 or at a later date? So those are going to be discussions that the board will continue to have this Wednesday. It's a board meeting, and then in early April when we return from spring break.
All right. And then there's like a couple categories. So the next couple of questions are if the Princeton plan were to be for next year. Then there's a couple of questions for if it's a year from now. And then there's a couple that didn't really fit in. So I'll start with the assumption that it's going to be next year. The first question is, how will you provide closure and prepare our students for these transitions prior to September?
Let me talk about the transitions. What our committee heard loud and clear is that that students and what we should expect out of them in terms of handling their transition is they will be fine. We heard that verbatim from three different school districts. And if I may, I'll tell you what they said. They said that the transitions are a parent problem. The kids are good. The kids are going to be moving with 150, 180 of their classmates from school A to B to C, and that typically the transition issues were more of a parental anxiety focus or just difficulty with change. So I don't anticipate students having an issue transitioning because we learned a lot of great strategies from those other districts. Opportunity for kids to meet their teachers in the prospective school, the school principal coming down, being able to bus them over and do walkthroughs. A lot of different initiatives to make people feel comfortable. I also think that once we get into the Princeton plan, regardless of when, remember, you're only going to have 2 grade levels in the school. So half the school is moving at the same time. So there's strength in numbers there. Certainly a great deal of support. Lisa Schuchman's on the call. She can talk, or on the video, she can talk a little bit about the work that she and her team are getting ready for in terms of using the elementary school counselors, psychologists, social workers to get them ready. But before, Lisa, just real quick, before I turn it over to you, let me answer the preceding question about closure. Look, we're not sure what closure will look like right now. We don't know what school looks like in a month from now, let alone next September. We're not even sure if people have to quarantine if they travel out of New York State, right? We can't even get that answer. So it really would depend. And I know closure is a really big concern or anxiety producing moment for families and children. I would say that we heard pretty clearly from folks that support the Princeton plan that basically say this year has been atypical anyway, and to bring students back to their home elementary school next year just for 1 year may actually create more unintended consequence than what we believe is the right thing to do. So like any decision, timing is everything, and it really is about readiness. I can tell you our team has been working diligently to be ready in case we move forward as early as September. On our end, as crazy as this sounds, we would need to identify staffing, pick the schools that would house which grade levels, and then in the summer, the transportation folks would work real diligently on the transportation model. That's the technical end. The readiness end is a little bit, a little bit different for kids and students, but to the extent that we could this spring, if we were moving forward next September, we certainly would try to find opportunities for kids to see their new school, meet their new teachers, those sort of activities, just like we typically would. But we're at the hands of the health department and elected officials in terms of what reopening looks like, but those would be the priorities.
Could I jump in before Lisa picks this up? So I just want to say that, because we've heard this question a few times now, in whatever way possible, and I'm going to speak for Josh and Donna and Cindy here, but I think they would agree with me. And if not, Josh, you can yell at me. I'd like to see us manage this joyfully. So we have kids who have been on remote instruction at elementary from the beginning of school and have not yet been back in their home school. And then we have all of our kids who've been with us. We have some children who've been at another school this year. Some of the BV students have been at Furnace Woods or Frank G due to space issues. But I'd love for us to put our heads together, and I'm sure that we can, to respect whatever social distancing we're required to meet and bring all our little guys back one last time at the end of the school year. If we have to stagger it by grade, as we did in the beginning of this school year when we were bringing kids in to meet their new teachers, I think we did that fairly well. I certainly would like every elementary child to have a chance to say goodbye BV or whatever it is they're saying, and then a chance also to transition over to the school where they would go. So visiting Frank G or Furnace Woods, whatever happens to be the school of destination. I think those are important things for them to experience, and I think we could do it regardless of the restrictions that we'd have to deal with. So, we want to make this fun. They're little kids. So we want this to feel celebratory, if you will, as we move forward, whether it's this year or next year. And next year, please, hopefully, we would not have the same restrictions, and it might feel a little bit differently. But nonetheless, there should be closure, and also the happiness and the joy of anticipating a new beginning somewhere. So
it's interesting, Margaret, that you talk about that, because I was a principal in 2 elementary schools. I was split, and we had 75 kids in each building. And they had just had huge remodeling, but they made one campus on the main campus where the middle school and high school were. So when we closed, it was bittersweet, because these schools were very rural. So they were 15 miles from the middle of town. Kids, that was their hub. And we did a lot of celebrating, and it's different now being COVID, but we had carnivals. We brought in like our best moments, and some kids came back from years past. So we made it a huge celebration. And these children were so worried because they had very small class sizes, 75 kids, K to 5. And when they transitioned into this huge campus, it was such a weird feeling, but the kids did really well. It's us as adults that we all still cried, and we were all very upset. That was our building. That was where we met. So, there's lots of ways to do it. I mean, we literally just closed 2 buildings. So it's different than merging grades in one building, but it's a lot. But the kids handled it so much better than we as adults, because I know I was very emotional as well. So Joe had asked me to speak a little bit about transition. So we have actually been having lots of conversations, learning from the other schools, what they have done, in order to make sure our kids are transitioned, but they also have a safe person to go to, someone they know. We're very fortunate that Miss Polito works with all of our grades, K to 5, and with every student with second step. So she is very familiar. So that's a great thing. But we're talking about, how do we place someone in a building and we have a good transition, because that way it's that consistent person in that building. We talked about splitting up grade levels, but if you do that, people are traveling everywhere. So we really have kind of put in a plan that they would stay put, the social worker or psychologist, and then the kids would move, but we would transition. So Mr. Hochreiter had said, meeting in January, we're doing a small group, doing a field trip, they get to meet their principal, they get to go on a field trip to the school. So those are the things that we would do in order to support students, but we do a really smooth handoff, which is very similar to when teachers meet. So we would meet as the mental health department with the next one, the mental health department, the next mental health group that they'd be seeing, talking about their pros, their cons, introducing them. We're pretty fortunate for the next couple years that the students have seen Andrea, they've seen Christina, they've seen Jen Lupiani, they've seen Dr. Wynn. So all these people are going to be people that are going to stay in their lives. So, that transition piece, I have seen it actually work pretty well with the kids that we already have in place when Dr. Wynn left, when Christina came, when Andrea moved, to another building. So it's doable. It's just the fact that we need to plan, and we will plan even harder if we go to Princeton Plan, and we will have a pretty solid plan laid out. So when we do have to transition, there are those supports in place for them.
Thanks, Lisa and Margaret and Joe. And I'll elaborate, if the decision is to be for September, we would go to buildings, they could come, we'll do everything possible. We already do it for kindergarten orientation. We have 5th to 6th. We would just insert those similar kinds of models and systems for the in-between grades. So I'm not worried. I know Dr. Kramer, Ms. Teresi, they're willing to do everything for our Hen Hud family. So, and I have heard from staff members as well, to go from like an atypical to a normal to an atypical is a little stressful versus, atypical, and then we go back. That's our new norm. So I have heard that as well. So, all right, the next one that came up about if we go next year is, how different are the bus rides really going to be over 6 years? ride time when at Furnace Woods and Blue Mountain versus the BV Frank G High School side of town?
Yeah, this is a really important conversation and distinction I'm going to make. Even in our most normal years, and for those of you who have had children in our system for a while, you don't get the bus run schedule until late August, early September. And the reason for that is because we have a very fluid enrollment system. As of today, I'll use as of last week, we're still waiting on roughly about 100 kindergartners to register. We believe they're coming, and we hope that they do. Um, but in a normal year, the transportation department waits until they have until we have the majority of our students registered. We have all the requests in terms of kids that need transportation to or from, childcare, you name it. And then we hit the magic button, and we run the routes. And the routes are done by a software system. And the goal of the software system is to be as efficient and quick as possible. And then our team, transportation team, will go in and fine tune it, because there are some things the software just can't find, right? Narrow streets with small cul-de-sacs where a bus can't turn around, but a van can get in there. So there are reasons why I can't tell you that if you live on Westchester Avenue, how long your bus ride's going to be. What I can tell you is that we have always had students being transported from basically one end of the district to almost the other. All right. If you live in the extreme part of the Furnace Woods zone by Hemlock Hill Farm, almost near Walter Panis High School, your ride to the high school is 30 to 40 minutes. Depending on which route you go and depending on which students live in which neighborhood, you may go a different way to the high school. You may go down Maple Ave and down Hudson, and you actually get to BV quicker than the high school. So there are some wrinkles that will take place, but I would say roughly 30 to 40 minutes going each way. That includes if you live in the most extreme corner of BV, let's say in the southeast corner along the river, bordering Croton Harmon School District, we have buses that go to the middle school, which is in the backyard of Furnace Woods. Those bus runs are also anywhere between 30 and 40 minutes. So that's a good marker, because we've always been doing that. And depending on, again, those are the extremes. Now, you'll spend 2 years at Frank G. So the BV runs and the Frank G runs will be a little bit shorter, because you guys are only about, you're just less than 2 miles away. But that ride will be a little bit longer for the Furnace Woods kids.
All right, thanks. That's what some people had talked about, the balancing out over time. And I am going to do this question that's about bus ride length. A lot of parents have used concern about a lack of planning regarding aftercare, before care, busing, et cetera, as a reason why we shouldn't adopt it for 21. I've heard this explanation of the routing software, et cetera, a lot of times. Is there really any reason to believe parents would have any more of a heads up to figure things out if we punt this to 22 instead of 21? Isn't it the same thing where we wait to the last minute to push the magic button?
We wait to the last minute to push the magic button, yes, because we have to exit all of the fifth graders that will move to the middle school system and then enter in all of the kindergartners. And we have a lot of kids that move during the year. And BV, you are one elementary school that realizes that, because on a number of occasions we have had to split sections at BV because you had more kids that moved in weeks, if not months, after the school year started. So we have a very fluid registration system, because we can't deny kids registration, especially if they're residents. But that is always a moving target. So to a degree, Luke, you're correct that it may not matter whether it's this year or next year, or in terms of when the bus routes would be made.
The other question for the doing it next year, and Margaret, you already started to address this. Can some of the things you've referenced before not be next year? So you've mentioned dual language, you've mentioned a STEAM teacher, you've mentioned a couple things. Can you clarify that it's not necessarily all or none with what you've shared as ideas?
Oh, absolutely. Those are just ideas that we've been dreaming of as a staff or as an administrator. The easiest transition is probably science as a special, because we would reposition current staffing. The hardest transition is probably foreign language, because I would have to work with my LOT teachers at secondary and reimagine the language over the 12-year span or a 8-year span, depending on how far we stretched it. Even
Oh, Margaret, just to cut you off for a quick second.
Oh, no.
This, and the context of this was when we're saying this is to save money, and though the other things we're adding. So if you want to maybe just have that lens of around money savings, and some we have to do like a special where some of these things can be over time.
Yep. So, you know, so pre-K is an interesting one because it's something we very much want to see. It can be grant funded. There is a UPK funding stream also at the state level. So Lisa and I have been exploring this for a while. Whether or not, again, that's possible in the first year, the second year, I don't really know. We'd have to sit down and talk that through. But there are a number of opportunities that are available to us, and some that will come as a result of living the model, if you will. I can remember as a teacher, once we were together, we said, well, okay, now we can do this, and perhaps we can take advantage of that. So some of it happens once you're there. I think that, you know, we've done a lot of planning behind the scenes, and we've had this conversation with staff as well, who are anxious about when will we know, and, you know, what will it look like, and will we be given time to pack our things, et cetera. So knowing that the board, you know, the committee has to deliberate, then the board has to, of course, deliberate before a decision can be made. Lisa and I have done a tremendous amount of planning behind the scenes, because if the answer is yes, we have to be able to immediately put some things in place. I think one thing that's important to understand, along with the busing conversation, is that the bulk of the physicality of this work cannot happen until children are not in school, whether that is this June or next June. We can't move teachers. Teachers cannot pack their classrooms. So all of that part of that, which is a big deal, doesn't matter if it's a year from now or 2 years from now. If we do it, it still has to happen in July and August. We can't uproot kids in April or May. We have to wait for children to no longer be coming to school. So what we have been able to put in place behind the scenes is we have lots of scenarios about staffing and, you know, how will teachers move? We've talked to the 3 principals, as Josh will share, about, you know, what grades would you prefer, et cetera. So as much as we can, we have tried to have different scenarios ready for us to move forward. But it is still, a lot of this work still has to happen in those 2 months of school when no one is in the buildings.
And this is a little unique because a lot of furniture was already removed and in storage, because to get the 6x6 model, they couldn't have classrooms as is.
Right.
If next year was normal, it would go back, you know, most of that may come back.
And in reality also, the thing to remember is that you're not emptying a building entirely and replacing it entirely. You know, furniture, at a certain point, furniture can be adjusted. Furniture, the desk that I sit in as a 4th grade student, I certainly can sit in as a 5th grade student. So, you know, I think probably the only thing right at this moment in time that I can envision happening while we're in session is the reallocation of our library collections. So if I knew that we were K1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then I would go in with librarians and I would say, break these titles down for me so that we can begin to figure out what gets moved to which building. But again, you know, as I said, the bulk of the work is work that would have to take place in the months when people are not here. So.
Margaret, while you're talking, I got one more that has your name in it. It was a question. It said, Dr. Ruller, you talked about how well the remote classes are going that have students from all 3 elementary schools. Why would we wait to start having our school community feel like one?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I think it's pretty obvious to everybody that I've been speaking with these past few years that this is a model that I am very much in favor of. Having taught in the model, I'm in favor of it. Are there flaws? Absolutely. There are flaws in everything that we do. But I think that this is a strong team in terms of teachers and support staff. And I believe that this is the right thing to do for our kids insofar as equity is concerned. We need to raise a generation that lives together from the beginning and makes friends and gets along and figures out where they belong in the crowd, so to speak. I think at the middle school, there still is some of, I know where this kid came from. I know where that kid came from. I know where the other kid came from, sometimes in terms of their academic experiences. And that's problematic. So we need to be able to address that together, and work hard to make those experiences, I'll say more equitable. I won't say equal. I'll say fair. Even though I know that at this moment in time, people believe that they're working in that direction, I always think that we can do a better job.
Josh, I want to go back because I want to make sure we don't misstep or mislead
Yes.
people, that we're talking about, maybe adding programs to the elementary model. So how are you going to save money and add things?
Thank you.
That was a theme that we heard very, very clear from the 3 districts we spend a lot of time with, that they are able to offer different programs to elementary students because their system is a little more right-sized and certainly much more cost-efficient. So we heard from districts that have started dual language programs. We heard from districts that offered, Margaret mentioned science, or a STEM-focused teacher at the late elementary level. The conversation our group meaning the Stakeholder Committee, is that it's about approach, right? We could reduce our expenses by $2 million, have tax avoidance of a little over 4%. And we talked about this at a school board meeting not too long ago. The issue is, do we want to just use this as an opportunity to save money and reduce the check that we're writing each year in school taxes? Or do we want to use it as an opportunity to dream and build and provide programs that we absolutely cannot provide right now, given the situation that we have 3 elementary schools, all with varied and declining enrollment, and given the financial situation we're in? And the answer is that we can't. All right, we have a school of 400 students and a school of 200. We have class sizes of 27 in one and 11 in another. So part of the conversation was with the Stakeholder Committee is, what would motivate families to support the Princeton Plan besides just financial, right? Let's say raising taxes is not a big deal to certain people, and we've heard that. We've heard that it's not worth, it's not worth the upheaval. Well, that's according to some, and certainly not others. But opportunities that exist within the Princeton Plan are that we could build onto some programs. We could build brand new programs to give families and kids an opportunity to access curriculum or instruction that we just can't do right now. And we can't do it because we can't afford it and because of the model. So that committee dreamed a little bit. They dreamed of what it could be and what the added value potentially could be, short-term or long-term, of going to the Princeton Plan. So I'll give you a simple math example. Let's say rather than saving $2 million in the Princeton Plan, we decide to use $1.5 million to reduce expenses, meaning tax avoidance, and the extra $500,000, we provide some new, innovative, unique programs to our students at the elementary level that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do. $500,000, roughly 5 or 6 teachers. Think of what we could offer in 3 elementary schools in the Princeton Plan if we had 5 or 6 extra people to be dedicated to STEM. We have a great STEM program at the high school and middle school. Imagine if we had dedicated STEM teachers, or we heard pre-K, or dual language, or more music or art, you name it. So that's how the conversation and really the excitement came about in terms of being able to build things into our elementary program, because there is an opportunity there. And I believe that's also a carrot. That's a carrot to incentivize families to think about this a little bit differently, to think about the Princeton Plan as not just savings and tax avoidance, but an opportunity to provide something for our kids today and over the next number of years that we have never offered, and that we probably would not be able to in the current model. So I want to be crystal clear with how that conversation started. And it wasn't just, as Margaret said, it wasn't just a small group of people in a room, dreaming how to reform Hendrick Hudson Elementary. It was shared by PTA members and families and community members. And it was a really dynamic and forward-thinking conversation.
All right. Some of the questions in the chat are about the benefits of waiting, doing it now. But I'm going to go to some of the questions about next, if you waited a year, and then I think if we haven't answered anything, we could just add on. Joe, the first question you've talked about a lot, it just says, how are you making up the money if you wait a year? Is there anything different you want to add than what you've already said?
Well, look, the board's going to have that conversation over the next couple of weeks. One of the unintended benefits of the last 2 fiscal years of our school district, last year 1920 and current year 2021, is we are going to end up significantly underspending our budget. All right. When we shut down last March, we didn't have buses running. We had the heat turned down. We didn't have overtime. We didn't have after school athletics, so on and so forth. We saved a significant portion of our estimated budget. Those savings go into basically the school district savings account called a reserve, and you have very limited opportunities to use that reserve. But how you can use the reserve is to lessen future tax increases. All right. So we made a big deposit into the district savings account last July. We're anticipating not as much, because obviously we've been open every day. But when we developed and when the public approved this year's budget, the 2020-2021 budget, it was based on the assumption we would be back to normal. And of course, this year has been anything but normal. So again, we estimate underspending our budget by a significant amount. Now that's the taxpayers' money. And so what the school board has to do is determine what's the best way to use the money that we raise through taxes. One potential way, and I know I'm getting into the weeds here, but one way is to go into our savings account, which is the community savings account, everyone that pays taxes, and to reduce a potential tax increase. All right. So one suggestion could be, if we choose not to implement the Princeton Plan for September of 21, does that mean taxes are going to skyrocket? Not necessarily. We could use the reserves or go into the bank account that we saved, again, an unintended benefit of the pandemic, and use those dollars to keep our tax increase very, very low, and something that we believe the community could support for 1 year. Now, that's not sustainable, right? Because once you use your reserves, once you dip into your bank account to fund your budget, then you are always dipping into your bank account to fund your budget. So we probably would have a 1 year reprieve where we could use additional savings to reduce taxes on everybody. But then we would have to pick up the ball and discuss it pretty quickly for September of 22. So one way to have a financial reprieve is to use our bank account, but it's really a one-shot deal, and perhaps this is the time to use the one-shot deal.
Thanks, Joe. The next question is, if you wait a year and you've already addressed that class sizes have not been equal, what are the plans to provide some equity for BV? Right now we have the model, everybody gets a TA, size is luck of the draw. I know more often than not at BV, we've had higher class sizes in the primary grades, which is, it just logistically means there's less time the teacher can get to each student in their rounds. So I think it's good at any point to do, because we've had many years having larger class sizes.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I want to use that question to jump on a soapbox a little bit, is to say that it has been luck of the draw, but basically it's been luck of your zip code. That depending on where you live and how old your children are, you may have a class size of 26 next year or a class size of 11 and a half. Those are real class size numbers anticipated for next year. Some schools are luckier than others. More often than not, BV has, I guess, been unlucky, because you have had more often than not higher class sizes at those early grades, those primary grades, than the 2 other schools. That's one of the issues that we're also, motivating us to consider the Princeton Plan, is when you have all these students in the same place at the same time, you can more equitably divide those students up over teachers. So rather than me saying, depending on your zip code next year in 5th grade, you're going to have 19 kids in one zip code or 27 in another, and those are two legit numbers. We presented those last week. We would be able to say within 1 or 2 students, every 5th grade classroom is going to have 22 or 23 kids, or every kindergarten classroom is going to have 18 or 19 kids rather than 11 and a half in one place or 22 in another. So that's big picture, equity. That's the starting gate. Class size is the starting gate to make sure that kids have access to their teacher and support staff in the room, and that teachers and support staff have access to kids. In terms of BV next year, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we also know, and Margaret's going to touch upon it a little bit on Wednesday in terms of use of title funds. But we try to get as creative as possible to send as much support to the schools that need it as possible. And I'll tell you a little story. A number of years ago, right before I came, our elementary schools all had the same number of reading teachers, even though one elementary school had twice as many kids as another. But we had the same number because that was equality, right? That wasn't equity, it was equal. Everyone had equal. Shortly after state assessments ramped up and a lot of noise around student performance statewide, we implemented iReady, we implemented some other measures, benchmark measures, and we realized that not every school needed the same number of reading teachers. Some schools needed more for a short period of time, and other schools needed less. And that was a sea change. That was a sea change for our staff because I remember we had to speak with one teacher in particular and say, yes, you have worked here for 25 years and you have been wonderful and beautiful and have done great things for kids, but you are more needed somewhere else. And Josh, I believe that conversation or that situation was we had to send some people to BV because we had some kids struggling. And so we tried to create equity that way with the existing people we had to deploy them a little bit differently. We've tried different models. Our team met this morning, Margaret, Lisa, myself, talking about before school, after school programs, summer school programs. And oftentimes those don't work because it's hard to get the kids to come in the morning or stay in the afternoon and they're spent, or over the summer. I mean, we're having a really interesting debate over what should we do this summer for children who some did not have the greatest year. Are we going to bring them in over the summer and drill them with small group tutoring and instruction, or let them chill out and relax over the summer? Hopefully we'll be more open and address some of those gaps in the fall. So we have always tried to deploy support and resources to the schools that need it. We would need to investigate with a little more clarity what the needs would be at BV. But in terms of title funds or additional help or support, certainly that would be on the table if we were to not implement the Princeton Plan and wait a year.
Anything else about, because I agree with that, the biggest bang for your buck is that 8:30 to 3:30 every day. What can you do to change the setting and teacher to student ratio versus those shot in the arms that may or not be, fully utilized when you're making a very long day for students that are maybe having a tough time at school.
Yeah. And because we've re-examined every year together how we used our title money, did it impact student achievement? And last year, we did not have an after-school program because we did not see results the year before. As Joe said, attendance was on and off, and it's inconsistent. I believe very strongly that remediation, if you want to call it that, has to happen during the school day. So we have to get creative about how we carve out those opportunities for kids and how we carve that out in a way that doesn't cause that particular student to lose even more ground because they're missing current instruction as they have an attempt at closing a gap. We are going to have that problem multiplied by 100 next year as we come back off of COVID. And we need to start talking about what that will look like, but that is a problem that always has to be addressed with more clarity at BV. And, it may be that if we don't go to grade banding next year, we may have to spend some money that we didn't anticipate spending. We can certainly use title funds for that. We also have some funding coming our way out of the American Recovery Act that we can use to close learning gaps, but we have to, that's definitely a drill down that will have to be done before we leave the school year this year, so that we are ready for it in the fall. And, you know, it's an all hands on deck situation to figure out what the best way forward is, so that kids don't feel as though they're failing, or they don't, this isn't their fault. Something happened and it caused this situation to, you know, become untenable in terms of coming in person. The last thing I want us to do is to put in place a program that makes the kid feel like they're a failure when they've had nothing to do with this. So we have to do some serious thinking about how we close gaps for kids in a way that continues to maintain their social and emotional health.
And what I think is good is that now, since we've gone to the universal assessments, whether it's iReady, Fontes, and Pinnell, you know, Margaret and company have district-wide data, so they could see, you know, where the resources are needed. It doesn't have to be the same. That's right at the district's fingertips, which is good. And I know you've shared, Margaret, that different districts do have different models for class size based on some of these variables, if the district so chooses to do that.
Yeah.
All right, so I think this is a good segue now to go into like this year versus next year conversation. So the last two are, what will the difference be if Princeton Plan is implemented this September versus next in regards to catching kids up? Follow-up, remediation also works best when kids are with like peers. They learn best from each other and are less likely to be nervous to ask for help when their peers need the same help. So I don't know if you want to speak to which one of the two models is better for return.
I'll say this, and I'll turn it over to Margaret to talk about that last comment about like peers. We are aiming for next year based on enrollment. Some sections in our schools are just going to have one teacher per grade level. The majority are going to be 2 or 3. When you're in the Princeton Plan, you have 6, 7, 8, 9 teachers in the same grade level at the same place. You're basically a department. You're a department of teaching 6-year-olds, 5-year-olds, you name it. You have more flexibility when you're dealing with that many teachers, because you can remediate and you can provide acceleration and extension activities to those kids with those staff during the ELA block, during a math block. I mean, kids can literally pick up and move. If they're reading 2 grade levels above, above where they're supposed to be, they're going to go to a different teacher and have a different activity and a different learning experience than students who are struggling. So in terms of remediation, yeah, you widen the net a little bit. You can, again, be a little bit more efficient. And to see kids that, or be among a group that's struggling with reading, could give students more confidence than, if there's only 2 sections of 3rd grade at a particular school. In terms of the timing, I think it's going to be about readiness, and it's going to be about preparation in terms of what families believe readiness and preparation should entail. There is a lot of conversation out there. I'm not a social media person, but you don't need to look hard to see it, that there's a belief that, we should go back to our home schools, have a year of normalcy, have our Halloween parades, go to a Shokin, have a parade of experiences before we get ready, and then be able to plan or have more time to plan for the transition, to identify the teachers, to have kids go see their new schools, those sort of activities. I think, whether we do it in 21 or 22, it's unknown whether, students are going to be more or less ready, but there are 2 camps. There are 2 camps out there in terms of who's going to be ready. I want to echo what Margaret and Lisa said. We believe in terms of preparing students for an instructional experience, we believe on our end we will be ready. There are very clear protocols we have to follow with the teachers to identify who goes to which school, who will be teaching which grade level. The transportation piece I already talked about. So it really is going to be about comfort level. Look, if we had another year to in order to implement, we probably would be able to implement or propose some different strategies in terms of getting ready, right? In terms of field trips, until having parents meet together, maybe spend more time with other districts that recently moved to the Princeton Plan to learn about some successes or some hurdles they had to overcome. So, more time could mean more preparation, but in terms of making sure that we have everyone lined up and ready to go in early September, if we implement the Princeton Plan, we believe we'll be all right.
Am I supposed to jump in here?
If you wish.
So yes, Rachel, thank you very much. I totally agree with what you've said there about kids supporting one another as well and learning from each other as well. It's the basis of the research behind heterogeneous grouping. How do our teachers feel? I don't want to speak for them in general, but I will say this, that I believe they see the advantages of it. Obviously, they're not pleased that they're losing colleagues, and there may be some people who are accessed as a result of this move. There's no doubt about that. But I do think that they are looking forward to that opportunity to be grade level colleagues together. They've done some thinking about that, what it would look like, what it would feel like, what a school could feel like, dedicated to 2 grade levels, 2 age groups, so to speak. I don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't know if there's a difference of opinion per school. I would say probably not, but again, I'm not the right person to ask about that. I think that, there's been so much workup around the conversation. I almost feel as though, and they can certainly email me if I'm misspeaking on their behalf, that I would say they probably don't want it to hang over their head for another year, because there's been so much conversation and so much planning behind the scenes. But by no means does that mean I'm speaking for every single elementary teacher when I say that.
What I could add is I've been in stakeholder groups with teachers from all 3 schools, and no matter what school you're in, they're all aware of the differences. And, all our teachers, no matter what school, work hard, but some have to work a little harder. You might have a class with, you have to do response to intervention for 6 kids, whereas in another school, you might have 1 in your class, if any. So it's different everywhere, but it's definitely not equal. So one of 2 things I would advocate for. I think it's beneficial to all our kids to, have those opportunities, whether it's placements, whether academic. And if it's not happening next year, we really have to have that serious conversation. What are we going to do differently at BV to acknowledge those differences and how our teachers have had to work in this system?
I want to tack on one thing that I thought of and then went right out of my head when I started to speak with you, is that, as a culture, celebrations are important milestones for us in our personal lives and in our professional lives. So while I completely understand thinking through things, I know there's been some conversation in one of my breakout groups about Schuchman and what would that look like, the fact that a grade level might not be able to have lunch together. I also want us to think, though, that as we look to the future, if this is an opportunity for us, we will build new experiences to have together. And, we'll make them better because we can. And I don't want us to think that if we went in this direction, we would be leaving all of these things behind. We have, I think, so much that we could look forward to that would be new and exciting. Maybe new places to go and new places to visit, and think of it that way.
I'm going to go rewind to the beginning. Jen asked, what are the benefits for implementing this fall versus waiting? I think as a principal, if I was, whatever the 2 grades are, I would really hone in on that professional development, knowing that, going deeper with that versus the 6. It's still helpful that all 3 of us have had 6 grades, because if you're a 2-3, you at least know the 1 and the 4, where they're coming from, where they're going, but you really would narrow the focus, whether it's learning walks, your faculty meetings, your early release days. We'd really have a narrow scope, and really, I think we would be a lot stronger as administrators. So that's the principal point of view. I don't know if anybody wants to add on Jen's question.
In terms of the benefits for doing it in
Yeah, and actually, I have one more thing. I'm looking at Lisa Schuchman over there. You know, we've had many people that have denied recommendations from CSE meetings, which were not in the best interest, in our opinion, of the child, because they didn't want to leave their neighborhood school. And parents would say, you know, the social benefits, I'm outweighing the academic. But in a Princeton plan where they're all, you know, every grade, every model, 12-1-1, skills ICT, if they're all in the same building, you might move teachers, but you wouldn't lose your friends. You know, you would still have that lunch and recess or specials. And I've seen it too many times where, like, man, you know, we did our best, but they really could have been a lot further ahead if they had taken advantage of the CSE's recommendation.
And I think that's something really powerful to talk about. I was waiting for a time to jump in. So thanks, Josh. That was a great transition. I think one of the things that we definitely have to think about is the way we have our special education set up now. If I'm a child in BV and I don't want to leave BV to go to Furnace Woods for my classes, I'm not getting any support. And families feel, and they have every right to this, of course, that they want to stay with their community and their friends, and they don't want to switch schools, whether it's March, whether it's February. And I totally understand that. But when they hit sixth grade, that's when we really see the big impact, right? That's when we see huge gaps that they have because they weren't able to get that specialized instruction. So I think this is probably, I have to say, I'm a proponent for it, like sooner than later, because of the fact that we are now going to be able to service every child. And the way we set up AIS will look different. And I think it would be such a powerful move for the district in itself, not only for the students, but also for the teachers. So if you think about it, in some of our buildings, especially at BV, our teachers loop. Your gen ed loops with your special ed from class to class. And a 2-year loop, and really connecting with those students and really moving them. We've seen great things happen at BV, Frank G, when those teachers loop. So I think those are really important things to think about as we're talking about the Princeton plan. We want every child to be successful. We want every child to have what they need, but it's hard to leave your friends and what you know to another school to something you don't know. So if you are a parent of a child with a disability, you'll notice that we haven't really been holding CSE meetings because we don't want to make a decision and then we don't go Princeton plan or we do go Princeton plan. So we've been trying to just make sure we're slowing ourselves down. We'll probably have a bunch of meetings after the board makes the decision, but it's really to really make sure that parents understand the options out there if we do go to Princeton plan versus we don't. A question Joe and I got yesterday was with our ABC students. So right now they are housed in Furnace Woods. Well, they're K1, 2, and 3, 4, 5. And would we separate them in the same grade bands? And my answer is,
oh,
yep.
You went to mute.
Yep. You have to make sure that that they have their peers that they can integrate with and be, and you know, because they're used to that, and we don't want that to end. So I think there's so many pros to it when it comes to special ed. And I think the depth of what teachers are getting academically and can really plan for is going to be so much deeper.
And just to follow up this year, not even special ed, we've had a lot of families ask us, you know, hey, I feel a little better about returning to school. And if we're at 15 and we're maxed out, we've been offering them one of the other 2 elementary schools. And it's not just BV, you know, having to go to Frank G or Furnace Woods. I know it goes both ways, but people have said, you know what, I'm going to keep my kid remote because I don't want to change schools, despite them in their first email saying they're crying, they're miserable. So it's unfortunate they're not picking the best setting based on their own descriptions because it's not their home school.
And I'd have to say, Josh, you're absolutely right about that, because I actually had 3 students I had to place in another school that were special ed. Their parents kept them remote and brought them back. And they're like, please tell me we're going back with our friends next year, and we're going back. And this is, so that's what I'm saying. Is it the best time? Yes, pandemic. Yes, I understand that. But if kids haven't been in the school, it's probably the best time, because you don't want to get them back into their school and then they have to move yet again. So just thinking about that and the actual thought of will if students go back to their home district and what impact that'll be to move them yet again. So those are just my 2 cents and my personal opinion.
and I'll wrap up this answer, Josh, by just saying something. It's a half selfish answer, but it's for real. If we choose not to implement it in 21, I believe we need to make a decision in short order to decide whether we're going to implement it in 22. Right? I think there needs to be closure to the discussion, so we can all plan either way. Well, I guess 3 ways: 21, 22, or nothing. So we can build our team, engage our families, because it's going to look different. And we have competing priorities right now. We're trying to have more middle school and high schoolers come back as soon as the weather gets nice or nicer for a more longer period of time. We're going to all have spring fever, cabin fever, and our focuses are going to change. So we need to, I think we need to make a decision, and even if it is 22, make it and let's move forward, because I think the more daylight between the analysis and the decision, we're going to be losing valuable time either way.
And I'll echo, no matter who I've talked to, parents, staff, whoever, they all want this decision sooner than later. Maybe not the board members, I don't know. But I know it's a lot of pressure, but everybody, the sooner you know, the sooner you could plan, whether it's, making, babysitting arrangements.
And the issue is, there's a valid question to say, because it's been asked, why in the world are you thinking of such a catastrophic or significant change in the middle of a pandemic? The reason this is a conversation now is because the financial situation in the district is not changing because of the pandemic. All right, the pandemic is not, going to change our short or long-term financial picture. So it's a discussion that we started over a year ago. Our committee was actually going to meet on March 27th, 2020. And obviously when the world shut down, we had to wait until we could get this year organized and get ready. So that is, one of the main drivers as to why it's a conversation now in light of all of the other things that we're dealing with.
Katie, I wanted to get to her. Is there any reason we haven't named of why we would wait a year?
Look, more time, more prep. We're able to engage stakeholders a little bit, more aggressively, a little more deeper, try to make them feel comfortable with the answers to questions. Look, I don't know what the 4th and 5th grade band, chorus, or orchestra would look like right now. I don't. In a year from now, if we were 6 months away from implementing the Princeton Plan, we probably have a little clearer picture. But we're also in a pandemic, and there aren't people, there aren't bands rehearsing and choruses singing in close proximity. So, there are little details that are really, really important, but in the order of operations of making a decision like that, we will get there, but we're not going to have all of those particulars mapped out. So look, more time could be more comfort. We have heard very clearly from the folks we worked with on the Stakeholder Committee that your kids will be fine. Just support them and love them and move them together. They're going to be okay. So, we may just have to spend more time with families, making them feel comfortable with change. This is significant.
All right, I'm going to transition. We have a couple more in the chat, but so it's not just me talking. Luke, do you want to share your 2 things at the end? Then we'll go to Jen and Liz.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure that this is somewhere online, but I couldn't dig it out. Approximately what percentage of our elementary kids district-wide are remote this year and therefore going to a new building next year than they were in this year anyway, besides the rising kindergartners and first graders who don't know what normal is?
We have around 200 elementary students committed to the remote model. I think at last check, Margaret, for me, it was just under.
I think it's less than that, actually. I think we have 11 sections with an average of about 14 kids. So what does that come to? And they've pretty much held steady since September. We've had a few ins and outs, a few kids come back, a few kids go remote, but it's been pretty steady at the elementary level. So.
And Luke, just so you know, we range anywhere between about 130 and 170 kids per grade level. And we shared our kindergarten projected enrollment last week. We'll share it again on Wednesday at Wednesday's.
Right. And then as Josh said earlier, Luke, we do have a few kids in person who are at another school. And that was because a particular grade level was maxed out at 15 in one building. And so we offered the parent live instruction, but it would have to be at a different school. So we have a handful of kids, I think under 10 probably, Josh, right? All around, that are not in their home school. I see Lisa Flanino shaking her head. She's the expert. So yes.
All right, Jen, do you want to share yours, please?
So, like you mentioned before, the equitability of between the schools. So if we don't go Princeton Plan, what does the board, what are they prepared to do to make the schools more equitable? Because let's be honest, it's not right now, and I'm not happy about that, as I'm sure a lot of parents are. So if it's not the Princeton Plan, what else are you suggesting?
Yeah, so as we shared earlier, we've been more strategic in terms of deploying support staff to schools that need it. It's not a cookie cutter calculation as much. We look at performance, we look at need. I know a number of situations Josh has had. He's needed extra hands, extra support, or more time and attention from any members of our team, or we have deployed staff there, whether it was to fulfill a commitment for a year or a short period of time. To work with a student or a para-student or a group of students, until we could remediate whatever the issue was. I don't have the class sizes in front of me, but I know they range. And depending on where you live or what grade you're in, you could be really, really low, or you could be really, really high. Anything beyond the staffing that we have projected would be a new, unexpected, sometimes unbudgeted expense. So that would be a financial discussion we'd have to have with the board to see if that was something that they would basically use more of our reserves or our savings account to hire more staff to deploy them to wherever there was need. I know we're here, it's the BV PTA meeting, and we want to make sure we support our own kids and neighbors, but that would be a conversation we'd have throughout the organization. Certainly BV, given the demographics and given the, I guess, the history of having larger class sizes than not, we would have to have a focus there.
Joe, I think the other thing that we should talk about, and Margaret and I have talked about this, if we don't go to Princeton, we're going to have conversations using our targeted school money. And how do we use that at BV to make it equitable and to support the staff? Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be a lot because we didn't get tons of money, but there's a little bit of money there to support what we can, because that's what the money is there for. So that's really important to know as well. It's not a lot of money, but it's a start.
And I think, for the board's ears, I don't know if we've ever had this conversation, that whole equity means we have to say to the community, school A, B, and C aren't going to get the same things. They don't have the same needs. So, maybe the TAs are allocated differently. Maybe the class sizes look different. It's a hard conversation to own. It's easier in this forum with the BV crew, but it may not be so easy with the Furnace Woods families or the Frank G families. So I appreciate the parents advocating and understanding that things aren't equitable. And if we aren't going to do something, we have to have a separate conversation around that. So thank you, parents, for speaking up as well. Liz, do you want to share what you were saying in the chat? You're still muted, Liz.
Sorry. I was just saying that hands down, the way that the transition through this pandemic was handled seamlessly. I just think we did the transition. So why can't the transition be done the same way we did for the pandemic? I mean, if we handle this pandemic the way we did, we can handle transitioning to the Princeton Plan. Like I said, it's just a benefit for our children. I think the parents are making the kids more nervous about the transition, as opposed to letting the kids just go with it and take this process and, accept being with other kids from the whole entire community. That's
Thank you,
just my
Liz.
thought. You're welcome.
We'll never miss an opportunity to thank you for your compliment. This year has been a challenge, and while it's great to hear so many of you feel the transition was smooth, we have data that suggests other people did not feel that way. So thank you. It's nice.
Well, I come from a family of teachers, and I see what they go through every single day, and I can't appreciate what has been done by every single teacher and faculty in our district.
Well, thank you. And I'll use that as an opportunity to say we are one of the very, very few districts that have elementary students in every day taught by an elementary teacher all day. That's a distinguishing factor. So we're proud of what we were able to accomplish in a really bizarre year. Again, I will share with you, Liz, what families have shared with us. More time will make people feel more comfortable, will make parents understand some of the nuance and the specificity that just right now we don't have. I keep using, band and orchestra as an example, but that's a legit one. How many kids are going to be in the room, and where will they rehearse, and where the concert's going to be, and those sort of questions become anxieties, and they snowball very quickly, and that leads people to believe, okay, we're not ready, therefore we need another year. We have talented staff that are going to help us solve a lot of these problems together. And we're going to lean on them and rely on them to work with us on this transition. So whether it's 21 or 22, we will be ready. I said to other parent groups, especially those who were on the Stakeholder Committee, I said there's the readiness from us, from inside the district, to be able to move teachers, assign a grade level, make sure the resources are there, make sure the trains run on time, figuratively speaking. Then there's the readiness for families. And I will tell you, we have heard from some, not all, and I'm looking at Antoinette, we have heard from some of the parents who have been very, very involved and great partners through the PTA. They're worried about what parent engagement will look like. That perhaps an extra year to plan will make sure that each school has a dynamic representative PTA to be able to support classroom instruction or support Mr. Cohen and his vision for programs and opportunities in the school. I can't put a weight on that, because that's either an experience they had from a conversation with other families in a Princeton plan, but also change is hard, right? We responded very, very well, I think, in the pandemic. I think we'll respond just as well and favorable if and whenever we transition to the Princeton plan. But it's a lot for families, and I'll repeat what I said earlier. It's a little embarrassing that I can't tell you what our school environment will look like in a month from now or next September, right? And I can't even tell you when we break this Friday at dismissal, when people may go on spring break. I can't tell you if they have to quarantine when they come back. There are many, many moving parts just in our reality today that I think one of the precipitating factors are people just want to cut the anxiety and be able to chill out a little bit as we get ready for another major shift. That's, I'm repeating things that I've heard, so that's about as reliable as I can provide.
All right, Joe, we just have two more in there, and then if you want to wrap it up after that, Rachel, you want to share yours?
No, I'm just looking forward to maybe being able to have all of the kids having the same enrichment at grade level. So more tailored, focused after school programs or assemblies or authors coming in. I mean, it's much easier to do it grade specific than building.
Yeah, and that's one of the benefits. And Margaret will go on for a really long time and lead a very dynamic conversation about organizing a school, the potential of organizing a school around 5 and 6 year olds, right? In terms of common language and what the tone and the feel and that climate, that DNA looks like just for little kids, and having professional development just for 5 and 6 year olds. And I'll go to the extreme, 4th and 5th grade. We're getting ready for middle school. We're going to use a different language. We're going to be a little more sophisticated, certainly with the DARE program about decisions and peer pressure. Yes, you can have a hyper focus and a very narrow focus that could impact the organization in ways that we're not afforded right now. I'm not going to speak for Josh, but I know when we had faculty meetings and we had people present and work in groups, it was hard. It was hard to keep everyone completely engaged when you have a 6-year age span between your kindergarten teachers and who they teach and the 5th grade teachers. So certainly, Rachel, to what you said, more focus and certainly the opportunity to drive more resources to a much narrower audience is certainly a benefit, and that came out in the SWOT analysis.
And I think what Rachel's speaking to also is that the main difference between the three schools is demographics. We have more people that qualify for free and reduced lunch. Furnace Woods has the least, and Frank G somewhere in the middle. So obviously, when you're fundraising, you can set prices a little higher where there's less free and reduced. When there's less free and reduced, bring more things that have higher costs. You know, our PTA has been awesome. Despite that, doing more stuff. You know, they're working a little bit harder and smarter at times. You know, because they have to. But it would level the playing field where you know you'd have a mix of all levels there. So thank you, Rachel. And I see Jen is the last one again. Jen Bacher, you're up.
No, it's similar to what schools
More
have.
of a comment, right?
Yeah, they have other, you know, they have after school programs that BV doesn't have, and that many parents want. And part of it has always been that not all of our school would be able to participate in them. And it's really unfortunate because it would allow the children that maybe wouldn't, it would allow kids opportunities that they wouldn't have. And so school's not just about academics, it's also about providing life, you know, life experiences that make them a stronger person and show them what the world has, and they may never have those opportunities at home. And I think at school, if we can provide them any part of that, you know, my kids are very lucky. They get to do a lot of things that other kids don't, but you know, I would love to be able to see that for other kids in our school.
Thank you. Is there any last ones before I turn it over to Joe? Going once, nothing in the chat, no raised hands virtually. All right. Well, I personally just want to, it's been great having board members on here because I know it really is up to the 7 board members to make this decision on behalf of all our students. So thank you for listening in. And, you know, I hope whatever it is, we work together with our family community to make it better for our kids because that's why we're all here. So thank you. All right, Joe. I'm done.
Yeah, my closing comments. Thank you. First of all, thank you also for being so committed. This is our 3rd PTA meeting in less than 2 weeks, right, Antoinette? I think Friday and a half ago, week and a half ago, and then this one. So thanks for being involved. Thanks for being engaged and participating in the conversation. I'll say this. This discussion of the Princeton Plan and proposal to implement it, regardless of when, it could be 10 years from now, is a very significant shift for our community. It's a conversation that has happened a number of times in our community, and we are closer to implementing it than ever before. And there have been some bumps in the road. There have been some really difficult yet important conversations, and we will continue to have those difficult and important conversations. So understand that this is a significant change. It is taking people's experiences and history of Hendrick Hudson Elementary School, regardless of where you went, and it's throwing it in the air and starting anew, and that is anxiety producing. I am anxious. I will tell you that. I am nervous. Do I believe it's the right thing to do? 100%. And I'm really nervous and scared when it's time to do it. But we've got to look at this from the 30,000 foot level. We've got about 2,300 kids, about 900 at the elementary level. And if this could bring about positive change, it's certainly worth exploring, and I commend our community for having that discussion. It has not been easy. It will never be easy. And perhaps going back to, I think, what Jen said, you know, maybe the pandemic made it easier. You know, I think we learned a lot about ourselves. We learned a lot about our kids. We learned a lot about how we cope with change and how resilient we are, or how we build skills to be resilient. So I think we're more poised for this change now than ever because of pivoting very quickly into this new model this year. So I believe if we implement the Princeton Plan, whenever we implement, we will be ready. And I think it will be a great benefit to our kids and families. So again, thanks for tuning in. We have another meeting tomorrow at 6 o'clock. If you want to join us, just come into the Zoom. If you want to watch, just watch it on YouTube, and you won't even we won't even see your faces or your icon. So hope you can join us tomorrow. And then again, our school board meeting starts at 6 o'clock with public comment on Wednesday. So for about the first hour of the meeting, you'll hear what other folks across the district have to say about this proposed decision to implement the Princeton Plan. So stay connected and stay involved, and thanks for spending so much time and energy with us. So